So, as I mentioned in the text message, and as you can see in the big red sign on this page, we're going to be talking about elders tonight. And I thought this is, I love God's timing on this kind of thing. I did not plan this way. If I were really good at planning strategically, I would think let's plan on talking about elders right around the time we're recommending for elders. And I would love to say that this was all by design. It wasn't. It just happens to fall on this time, and it's a great time for it to fall on. Sunday, this past Sunday, we took in some elder recommendations via a care card. We will have an actual more formal, we had one printed last Sunday, it got missed. So it will go in there this week as well, although the care card is fine. But what we do is we ask every year for members to recommend individuals who they believe would make good elders for the church. Now, some questions come up as to what is an elder? What does an elder do? What is their responsibility? And what does the Bible have to say about them? There are two primary passages that deal with elders, and that is 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7, and Titus 1, 5 through 9. As I mentioned, Titus covers a lot of what Timothy covers. Because Paul's writing to two individual pastors, it stands to reason that he probably had a lot of the same thing to say to each of them, and this is an example of that. Titus 1 has, I think, one extra qualification or characteristic of an elder, but certainly it's a qualification found in the deacons in Timothy's letter, so I think if Timothy and Titus were to get together and talk about this, having not read each other's letters, they would have probably still had the same idea of what Paul had in mind. What do you think of when you hear the word elder? What comes to mind? Older person. Yeah. Any other thoughts than that? Wisdom, okay? Authority, good. Someone you look up to? Okay, yeah. So I think you all definitely answered first what most people think, which is an older person, right? And I think this is probably a little bit of a conflation of the English word elderly, an elderly person, an elder, same thing. And certainly, there are some equivalences to the words. When we think of an elderly person, we think of someone who is typically more wise, who has authority because of their position within the family or whatever the case may be. But this is not the Greek understanding of this word. It has nothing to do with age, actually, at all. It's the Greek word presbyteros. It's the word from which we get the word presbyter, the Presbyterian denomination. This is what they form their denominational word off of. And it simply just means an overseer. An overseer. Someone who is charged with authority to oversee specifically a local body of believers. This was a practice that was being practiced already before the time that Paul wrote this to Timothy. Paul is simply, he's not establishing a new office here. Some have said that elders in a church, elder-led churches, are more of a Pauline idea, an idea that comes from Paul, not from Jesus or not from Judaism. It's just simply not the case. When we read the Gospels, you hear about these scribes and elders. These would have been, once again, overseeing type individuals. When you read, for example, Acts 14:23, Acts 20:17, there are descriptions of local churches where they gathered the elders of that place together to make a decision. So it was already being practiced early in the church. Acts 14 is prior to the Jerusalem Council, so this was early in the age or lifespan of the church. Paul is simply not developing a new office. He's bringing clarity to the type of person who ought to be considered for the position. And he's going to give several qualifications here in this chapter that I think are worth looking at. And I say that for you specifically, especially you who are members, so that when you recommend somebody, you don't just recommend somebody because, yeah, he's a good guy, or yeah, he's a funny guy, or yeah, he's a successful guy. But does he meet these qualifications? these are what we're really after in an overseer. It says that he must be first above reproach. He must be above reproach. Now, once again, this doesn't mean perfect. We recognize that we all have a fallen nature, but to be above reproach means to live in such a way where it is very difficult to find fault with the individual. At least to find fault with that has not been confessed, repented, or known, right? So like, for example, if you have somebody who is, I don't know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Let's say somebody who gossips, all right? And they're a great guy, and he's godly, and he does all these things, but man, he just kind of talks bad about people. And it's something that is not like being actively worked through. He's not confessing it. He's not even really aware of it. That would be a disqualification at that point. If it's somebody who I love Jesus, but I cuss a little, but I'm working on it. I had years of addiction, and now I've been years in believer, but I sometimes stumble, but I'm aware of it, and call me on it. I think we can be legalistic about what it means to be above reproach. If we take it to the nth degree, no one is above reproach, right? So we have to come up with some sort of idea of what Paul meant here that doesn't mean no one, because certainly that's not what he means, but that also has some standard in mind. Someone who is generally thought of as morally upright in the general sense of the word. Not morally perfect, but morally upright. The husband of one wife. Any other translations that say anything different than that? Husband of one wife?
Mine says faithful to his wife.
Interesting. Okay. Is that different than husband of one wife?
Yeah.
I mean, you can be a husband of one wife and not faithful. Yeah. So the Greek here, literally translated, is a one-woman man. A one-woman man. That's a little bit of an interpretive move. But honestly, even the literal translation, one-woman man, is a bit ambiguous because it can mean different things. And this has been the source of debate for many years in many churches, our denomination really actually not being one of them, because our denomination isn't typically one that is elder-led. We'll say more about that in a minute. But some hold this to mean a one-woman man in the sense that he is with only one woman forever. Okay? Some hold that he is with one woman only unless she dies, and then he could remarry at that point. Some hold to the idea that he is a one woman at a time man. I mean, we laugh, but it is, well, there is something to be said. Now, that's not the way I read this verse, but contextually, you could make an argument that because of a polygamous type of mindset, especially in the pagan world where paganism and sexual misconduct is very closely connected, you could make the case that he is saying someone who is only committed to one woman at a time. I think that the best way to approach this is, I think church to church, right? I'm not trying to dictate what other churches interpret this. I'm trying to interpret it in the context of City on a Hill. And I think the way that we interpret this, the best way we are served, is by interpreting this in the way that we interpret the majority of the things that we look at, which is asking the question, what is the position of the heart in relationships, specifically marriage? Okay? I don't know that I would go as far as to say a one-woman man forever, for all time, and no other woman. And the reason I say that is because there are examples in the Scripture of when, if a spouse dies and that person desires to remarry, they're free to do so. And so it seems creating a law where perhaps there isn't one, in saying that you cannot be an elder here if you were married, your wife died, and you've since remarried. I just think that's a little overbearing for the sake of being overbearing.
What if you were divorced?
What if you were divorced? So that's a great question.
And what if you were single?
And what if you were single? Can you be single? So I would have to ask James on, I've never asked his opinion on that. My take on it is no. You need to be married. And once again, because there is no indication that singleness is, I think what Paul would say probably, if you are single and desire a position of authority within ministry, you should be a missionary, not an elder. Because your lifestyle yields itself well to be able to do things that married men have a more difficult time doing. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians. He talks about, I desire you to be like me and not married. But if your passions burn, then it's better for you to be married than to have sexual immorality in your life. But the reality is, the truth is, and you don't have to know the Bible well to know this, you can be a missionary a lot easier when you don't have a wife and kids. It doesn't mean you can't be if you have wife and kids. We have families in our church that are. But it's certainly easier. You can just get up and go and do whatever. You have no responsibility for anyone else. The other reason I think it's important for marriage and why Paul designs it this way is because the church family, in a lot of ways, the leadership and structure and submission, mutual submission in the church is to mirror the home. And in the home, he gives a very clear basis that the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. Doesn't mean he lords over her, doesn't mean that he's commanding or domineering or doesn't want her opinion. But at the end of the day, someone is responsible for the spiritual direction of the home, and it's the father, it's the man. And so the mirroring of the home to the church, I believe, is very intentional, although it never explicitly says that. But there are connections. He talks about, later on, he's going to talk about, for specifically deacons, managing, and he says it for elders as well, managing children. If you can't even manage your own household, how can you manage God's church? Right? So I think there is a level of learning that a man goes through in being married and having children that equips him further for this type of leadership in the church. But let's talk about divorce, because I think that's one that is interesting and one that a lot of pastors wrestle with. Because once again, is a divorced man, is it as simple to say that a divorced man is disqualified from this type of leadership? I don't think it is. And the reason why is because there are biblical precedent for divorce in certain circumstances. If a man is married to a woman and he becomes and vice versa for that matter, a Christian, and they are not a Christian, and they flee, they decide to leave or desert that person, Paul says, don't go after them. Let them leave. So there's that example. Of course, adultery is the big one that Jesus gives. He says, that because of your hardness of heart, God gave you the certificate of divorce in the event of adultery. It's not what God desires. We always pastorally, in the event of adultery, counsel to try and work things out. It takes a lot of time. There's lots of boundaries that have to be put in place. It's hard, and a lot of people don't do it. But at the end of the day, there are times when it is appropriate for and biblically okay for divorce to take place.
But you're saying a divorced guy could be
I think he can be if
he's single.
Well, assuming he's also remarried.
Oh, remarried.
Yeah. So, and that's really kind of the major crux of it. It's like if a man comes and he was divorced, 10 years ago to another woman that had an affair, and he tried to reconcile and she wouldn't, and does that disqualify him from eldership? I don't really see how it does. He did everything in his power, assuming he's telling the truth, obviously, to do things the right way. So.
Now, if an elder is to be considered and everything, do they also will look at the wife?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We have done that, I think, for almost all of them. Wife, we look at kids if they have kids. And once again, that sounds like we're not looking for perfect kids. We're looking for kids who are mostly being shepherded in the right direction. I remember several years ago, John Piper, real well-known preacher, he's retired now. Many of you probably are aware of Piper. One of his sons walked away from the faith, and I think has since returned to the faith actually now. But when that happened, Piper attempted to resign from Bethlehem Baptist Church, where he was pastor at, because he felt like he had been disqualified in not managing his household. And the elders of that church actually came back and said, no, we do not think that you're disqualified, because his son was like a 25-year-old. I mean, he wasn't living at home.
Making his own decisions.
Yeah. His household, it wasn't really under his household anymore. And yeah, at the end of the day, so you see what I'm saying? Like, the qualifications are meant to be guidelines to show general tendencies, positions of the heart, spiritual condition of the individual. I don't think they're meant to be so black and white that otherwise, once again, you end up eliminating everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond legalistic. It's unrealistic. It's no one. There is no one that fits the bill, and Paul's not doing this for fun. He's got some kind of person in mind. The point of the husband of one wife is that he's a faithful man. He's a man who cares about his marriage, who leads his family well, who shepherds his home, who does everything in his power to put them first and lead by example. That's really kind of the idea here. I think you can get into the, we are the best at like, well, what about if his wife died, but then she came back to life, but he didn't know it? And he remarried, but then she's still alive. I mean, it's like, I don't know what we would do about that. We'll cross that bridge when it comes, I guess.
What's the difference between an elder and a deacon?
Yeah, so we are going to get to that in a moment. Because we do have it on here. It's down a little ways, but we're going to talk about qualifications of that as well. So above reproach, husband of one wife, sober-minded. Sober-minded. Now, this is one that I think probably people immediately go, he doesn't drink alcohol, right? That is not necessarily what Paul's saying here. To be sober-minded means to be clear of mind. To be unaffected or impeded mentally to make decisions. This is a man who is being entrusted with the authority to lead and direct the body of Christ in a contingent of people, not just him alone. And so he needs to have the clear ability to think and make good decisions on a regular basis, because he's going to be doing that for the direction of the church. If he is impeded in any way, mentally speaking, whether it's from alcohol, drugs, both illegal or otherwise. There are very, very real and okay scenarios where you have health conditions, you're required to take certain medications that affect the way you are able to render judgment. That has to be considered. It has to be considered. Mental capacity. Now, it can mean alcohol. It can mean that if you're someone who is prone to drinking alcohol in such a way that your mind is affected, then yes, you would be disqualified at that level. But that I don't think is exactly and only what Paul's saying here. Someone who's self-controlled, once again, someone who is not devoured by their passion to do whatever it is that they want to do. Someone who has the ability to say no to the things that they desire or are tempted to do. Someone who's respectable. I mean, this is just a basic one, right? Someone who people think they're worth listening to or following. Someone who has respect, not who demands it, not someone... It's like this. You can think of it this way, that we don't respect our elders because they're elders. We respect the person, and that's why we elect them to become elders. Right? Now, you should respect or give honor to the elder, the position of elder. Paul's going to say that later. But that's the qualification for the kind of person who's going to be elected into the elder role. They need to be respectable. They need to be hospitable and be welcoming of people. Doesn't make much sense to have somebody governing, especially someone who's going to be issuing discipline, if they're not hospitable in nature, if they don't like people. If you don't like people, you should not be an elder. Because it's going to not work out well for the people more than anything. Able to teach. Able to teach. Now, this is one of those things where I think this is debatable about what Paul intends to mean here. Here's what I don't think he means. I don't think he means someone with the gift of teaching. Because I think if that's what he meant, then he would say that. And there's no other mention of any kind of gift specifically in this text. I think that able to teach, what he is intending to convey here, is someone who knows the word well enough to be able to instruct others. Such that if someone has a question about the faith and they come and ask that question, an elder is able, in some capacity, to open the Bible and teach the person what it is that they are desiring to know. Not in depth, we're not looking for seminary excursus, but something along those lines. Not a drunkard, so there you go. If you want to go to the alcohol thing, that's kind of where it is. But notice, not a drunkard doesn't once again mean someone who just fully abstains. This is someone who is not perpetually, habitually a drinker. Not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Someone who is going to be gentle, kind, hospitable, not someone who erupts in anger towards other people. Not a lover of money. Now that's the one that is a little different in Titus. Titus just says straight up greedy. He's not greedy. You know, Paul's going to say to Timothy, a lover of money. The idea here is that an elder is not someone who does things for the sake of monetary gain, but for the sake of kingdom-mindedness. It doesn't mean that he didn't have a job. It doesn't mean that it's wrong for him to make money doing other ventures. But if his mind is constantly oriented towards how can I gain more prestige and money, exactly, that's where it becomes a problem. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? We already talked about that. I think that's pretty clear. Here's a good one. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. So this is, I think, probably more than anything, a fail-safe against individuals who come to faith, probably at this time who were Jews prior to their conversion, who knew the Old Testament scriptures very well, who would have seemed at an early point in their conversion already very well established in their command of Scripture. Paul certainly probably had himself a little bit in mind here when he first came to faith. He could school anybody on the Old Testament. He was a Pharisee. He knew the Bible better than probably all the other apostles. But remember, we've talked about this, that Jesus is the defining mechanism of the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments. So you can know as a Jew all of the Old Testament scriptures, and if you have not believed that Jesus is the Messiah, you will not rightly interpret the scriptures, because the scriptures are prophetic towards something that has already come to pass. So you will orient those texts to an event that is not the real event. You've missed the event. So you've missed the interpretation of what it is that the law and the prophets were trying to say. Yeah.
So is this where growing up, I was always taught that the elders, in case they need to step in the place of the preacher to be able to, get up and preach. Is that where the part is learned in the Bible comes in?
So some churches some churches practice that. So in Presbyterianism, especially the Reformed Presbyterian circles, not so much the United Presbyterian, they're very left. But the Reformed circles, only elders teach. So they would argue that you have to be an elder in order to teach in any capacity. So children's church, you're an elder. Yeah. Youth ministry, anything, it's got to be an elder. Now, this comes from a combination of a couple things. One, probably a little bit of tradition, but two, it comes from the idea that able to teach and elders mean that having authority over a congregation and teaching are the same thing. It's kind of like what we talked about last time with regard to the gift of teaching, with regard to the role of females and males. And I argued that what Paul is arguing against is the idea that women teaching in a capacity that is authoritative over the people of God in such a way where she is giving spiritual direction and orienting the church to a specific direction. In other words, a senior pastor role is what Paul is arguing against. But there are plenty of examples of women giving instruction that don't seem to be problematic at all. Priscilla and Aquila were brought up last time, the couple in Acts who are teaching some of Paul's disciples, and no one seems to have any issue with that. And people have argued like, well, her husband was with them, so maybe her husband was doing all the teaching and she was just sitting there, like she was just sitting there silent? Why was she there then? Like, that is so stupid. It's not how you would read that text. It doesn't make any sense to me. There is an idea, though, that teaching is putting people under your authority. And, you know, we talked about this, I think, pretty at length last time. I just don't think that really makes a lot of sense. And I don't think anyone really agrees with that at the end of the day, practically speaking. Because if that were the case, we would not listen to certain, like if you listen to John MacArthur on a podcast, that means you're under his authority while he is teaching you. I mean, you really think that? I mean, I hope not. You know, when we have guest preachers come into the church and they preach from our stage, we are not intending for you to think that you are under their spiritual authority. You're not. You do. If they tell you need to go home and do X, Y, and Z, you don't, because they're not your overseers. They're like an evangelist that comes in. So you're always to be testing the Scripture based on what they're saying. You're always to be doing that, by the way, with us as elders. So that's a thing that even applies to the eldership. But we don't really think that. We don't really act that way, that listening to teaching somehow puts us or positions us under authority of anyone. We just somehow have kind of gotten by with it in this one topic of discussion. And I just think it's a cheap argument, honestly. It doesn't really jive well at all. Now, sometimes elders step in and teach if they have the gift of teaching. That's what I would say. Even in Paul's time, not every elder teaches. Because I mentioned this last time, he's going to go on to say in 2 Timothy that you know, you are to grant honor to your elders, a double portion to those who teach, which indicates there are some who do and some that don't. The ones that do, give them double honor. The ones that don't, give them single honor. It is, yeah. So this was a reality in Paul's time. And so the notion here that they need to embody the fruit of the Spirit. They need to know the Word of God. They need to be committed to their family. They need to be morally upright and respectable amongst most people. I think if you have that going on, that captures pretty much the heart of what Paul is saying here about what an elder should look like. Here's the last one, and I think this one's important, one that we rarely talk about. Verse 7. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. This is an important one, right? The pastor, the elder, and we say that together because really what we mean by pastor and elder are the same thing. They're almost synonymous. The authority driving or authoritatively binding leadership of the church. In this church, that consists of lay leaders and vocational leaders. And the only difference between us is how we label them. Charlie and Mike are both elders right now. They have outside jobs. They were recommended by the body. They were affirmed by the eldership and affirmed by the body. They're elders. There's, I guess, 9 of us right now. James and I are considered elders. We are, I guess, teaching elders, if you want to call us that. Alan McBrayer is still on the elder board, although he doesn't. He's very much an elder. He doesn't exercise his opinion much because he's distant. He's in Houston doing his own thing, and so. But we listen to his opinion when he has it, and we ask for his opinion still. And then beyond that, Keith Waller is rotating off this go around. Jim Bauer, Robert Dumond, and who am I missing? Robert, Charlie, Keith, Marcus Daugherty, yeah, who is a great elder. So we have that group of guys. James and I obviously don't rotate off because we're always here. And the other 6 who are in rotation serve for 3-year stints. And every year, 2 roll off and 2 roll on. So last year, Mike Samuels came on with Marcus Daugherty. They're in their 2nd year. This year, we're about to roll off Keith and Jim, I believe.
No, Keith and Robert.
Robert, is it Robert? Yeah, okay. He has one more. I can never remember the years. And we'll ask for 2 more, and they will begin in 2020, and they'll serve from 2020 to 2022.
How often can an elder cycle back through?
We don't have anything in our bylaws. I don't think that states longevity. We could. Yeah, Charlie's been recycled a few times.
Yeah. But he can't like not serve the next 3 years, of course, right?
Well, what he would do is it would be required for him to take at least a year off. So he would cycle off, 2 more would come on. He would be eligible to be recommended again that following year. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you say elder-led, but then you still put votes out to the congregation for things like the refuge ranch and things like this. Can you?
So we don't, and we try, and we probably have not done this well. We try not to say vote. What we ask for is affirmation. And I know it sounds like, tomato, tomato kind of deal. Really, what it does is it does 2 things. One is it gives us an indication of what the body thinks about the decisions that we're making. Because while the body has entrusted the elders to make decisions, we also recognize that if we make a decision that we believe is right, and you are in majority disagreement with it, it doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. It means we're not going to do it now. We're going to come back and figure out. And this happened with, it didn't really happen with, I can't say that. There were like 3. So when we asked for affirmation for Kelsey to come on as our full-time worship leader, we had, I think, 3 people who did not affirm. And what we said was to those people that, as we were talking about it, that let's say in a hypothetical scenario, if 20% or 30% said we don't want to affirm him, then what we would say is like, we have bigger problems on our hands apart from hiring Kelsey if the very people who have been positioned and entrusted to lead the church are not being trusted to lead the church. So if the elders recommend the hiring of an individual because we believe it is good for the vision of the church and the betterment of the ministry, and the church is like, no, we don't want that, then that reveals a trust issue between the body and the elders, and we don't want to proceed forward till we've dealt with that. Because if we go on and just hire him, then we have 30% of the people all of a sudden who are upset. This is one of the reasons, this is a good time to talk about this, why we as a denomination do not follow the norm when it comes to our denomination. A lot of Southern Baptist churches, and a lot of you know this because you grew up in them, are committee-led. You are congregationally led. And the issue with that is that, like, once again, let's say we're hiring a worship minister, and he wins by a 60-40 vote. Well, he's won. He's coming on staff, and 40% of the church doesn't want him. That is really, yeah. And so maybe they walk, or maybe they don't. Maybe they're just, all of a sudden you have some serious disunity in your worship time.
Like that can cause a split.
It does cause splits. Absolutely causes splits. So the call for the affirmation from the congregation is one way for us to ensure that we don't need to do further teaching or or discussion on the matter. We believe when we come to a point where the elders recommend a decision as big as that, and that was a big decision. You got to understand, Kelsey's the first full-time music minister we've had in almost 15 years. It's been a long time coming. And, we were able to make it work in the model we had for a long time. But as I took on more responsibility and Laura has kind of begun doing other ventures, it's difficult for that. And even honestly, I mean, just in a moment of transparency, even when we didn't have the responsibilities we had and we were really doing it, we weren't doing it as well as Kelsey's doing it. Kelsey is trained. Kelsey has a degree in worship leading from DBU. He's got 7 years of experience doing this in a mega church. And not that that's the end all be all, but when it comes to systems, organization, and shepherding, he is very good.
I know this is a rabbit trail, but when you say like 60-40, or what, not vote, affirmation. What percentage really of the voting body is actually voting, not voting, affirming?
Affirming?
Or not affirming?
You mean how many show up for it?
Yeah.
Kind of deal?
And cast their opinion or whatever. Are you taking online stuff? Or?
We took a lot of online. I didn't count paper for paper. It was several hundred. I mean, it was a lot of people. It was enough for us to go like, I think this is probably pretty representative. And it's for members, so it's not like the whole church service contingent, because there's a lot of non-members as well. Some non-members casted their vote, and it's good to know kind of what they think, but we don't count that towards the official affirmation. See, I just did it. Affirmation. So,
How do you even know who's a member? Are there so many people?
we have a database.
So you just look at that. Check it out.
Plus, we do. It seems crazy because there's a lot of people, but you kind of get a feel after a while. If you're doing like prayer requests and you have ministry roles, like I have rosters for all the Bible studies that I'm looking at pretty regularly. You see names a lot come through, and so you kind of get a feel for it. And I'm the one that implemented this particular database that we're using, and so I did the data transfer. I did all the rearranging. It was brutal. That is not my love language. I'll put it that way.
I think it's important for everybody to know too that no decision is brought forth for affirmation unless there is absolute unanimity among all the elders.
That is true.
And that it's prayed about. The elders pray about it individually and collectively. And if one elder says, no, this is the right decision, then it doesn't come over.
You'll never hear about it.
You never know.
Are there decisions that the elders make without affirmation from the church?
Are there decisions? Yes, there are. The bylaws require us to have affirmation from the church for acquisition of new land, for the hiring of full-time pastoral staff, for budget approval for the 2020 year, and for elder affirmation. And then we have restrictions on us from a pastoral standpoint as well. So even though I'm on the elder board as a pastor, if I'm looking to make a purchase of something that exceeds $2,000, I cannot make that purchase without elder approval. So like if we need to buy, let's say, 4 new microphones, that easily goes over $2,000 if you're getting something worth having for a while. We would have to submit that and say, hey, this is what we need for this amount. Even if it's budgeted, we need to have this approved. And normally I'll just ask Alan, and if Alan has a good enough gauge where if he feels like that needs to be like tabled, then we will. But the great thing about this is that the pastors and the elders have built through years of practicing this trust. So the elders trust that we are making decisions that are not spur of the moment, unthought through, unfrugal. because we've demonstrated enough of coming to them and saying, and it's kind of like, you know, if you've worked in any position of authority, or if you have kids especially, where it's like, you know, anytime you do this, you need to ask. And it's like, after they come, like so many times, you're like, you know what, just do it. Don't ask me anymore. You're fine. You can go to the bathroom. It's fine. You don't need to come in and wake daddy up. Just go to the bathroom. So it's kind of that you build a trust, though, that happens over time. One of the cool things, and one of the reasons why I love the way we rotate, is that like Mike, for example, was new to the elder body. He's never been an elder before. Marcus is not. Marcus was an elder like 20 years ago. We typically try every year to bring in a new elder and what we call a retread, someone who's done it before, because we want to continue to teach men what the process of eldership looks like, but we also don't want a bunch of new guys in there. We need to have some guys who've been around for a while and sort of know what's going on.
So to be able to teach the younger ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have a good contingent of that right now. And we've got a lot of guys that are, I mean, there have been times in the years past where I remember where it was kind of like, who do we elect for elders this year? Who do we recommend? And we were talking about it the other day, and I'm like, I've got more names than I can count right now. We've got some great candidates for it. It's very exciting.
So do you guys recommend this to the body?
So what happens is the body makes recommendations. That's what we do. That's what we did Sunday. We're doing it again this Sunday. We collect those. The ones that we got in Sunday, I've already sent to the elders via email to consider. Then this next Sunday, we'll get more. We'll send them. We are able also as members to recommend. So we'll throw them in the pot as well if we think of somebody that wasn't mentioned. And then what we do is we make a list of all the names and we talk about them as a group. And we kind of narrow it down to 4 or 5 that we feel like are the best. We numerically number them in priority, which ones we think are the absolute best for right now. And then we go to those guys, numbers 1 and 2. We say, you've been recommended by the body as an elder. We'd like to interview you. Is this something that you would be willing to answer the call to? And they pray about it. And I asked Charlie last time, and he's like, man, I'm going to have to pray about it. And Lord, thank you. He came through for me. And but then they come back to us, and we interview them. And then at that point, once we have narrowed it down to those 2, they've agreed, we will put out another piece of paper in the weekly for 2 weeks with the 2 elders who are being recommended by the elder body with a budget for you to affirm. And that's after, once again, we've done due diligence, we've had the conversations, we've talked about them, we've looked at their life, we've looked at their patterns, all that stuff.
Are there some people that you don't really know that well? That people recommend?
No.
No?
No, I mean, I think that's kind of the great thing is if people are following these guidelines, it's going to be pretty hard for us to not know who you are if you're living this out. You're going to be notable.
And you're already involved in the church in some aspect.
Yeah. So.
Now, I didn't hear the story as why a woman can't become an elder.
So it is just simply based on the guidelines of the elders that a one-woman man sort of eliminates a woman. The thought process.
She be a one-man woman?
Good. A one-woman man. We talked about this, I think, before you came in. It means someone who's faithful to his wife. Doesn't necessarily mean not a divorced man if the divorce happens under biblical reasons or if the wife has died.
But what does that have to do with the woman?
Yeah.
Well, a woman cannot be a one-woman man.
A woman also cannot be the head of her household if she's married.
She can, but she's certainly not supposed to be. But a one-woman man, that is the description. That is a qualification of an elder.
So you're saying all elders have to be married?
Yes.
But are you taking that one woman man thing from the Bible?
Yes.
And just because things have like so much changed over the years with how people are, why couldn't they change that so women could do it?
That's a great question. So It is. I mean, it is in, what is it, verse 2. The husband of one wife literally is one woman man. So people have argued this, that like, well, times have changed. Women have been empowered, right? Women, in some ways, in Greco-Roman world, were more equal than you are in America. So depending on where you are in Greece, for example, Sparta is one of the notable areas where this is the case. Women don't answer to anyone. I mean, it's like they are equals. They fight together. It's kind of remarkable. So I think the whole notion that like, you know, we're in the age of empowerment and all that, and so things are changed, is not as equivalent as you might think, because I don't know that it would have been that much different then. Beyond that, it raises an even bigger question though. Who is dictating at that point the way the church ought to operate? Right. Well, what I mean by that is if we take the approach that says, well, things have changed now and the world is a different place, and so we should adapt, then are we not being led rather than by the Scripture of the world? You see what I'm saying? And that doesn't seem like as big of a deal. And hear me when I say this. I've known women who would make great elders. In some ways, better elders than us guys, all right? This is not a matter of like, I don't think women are capable of doing leadership type things. It's not what I'm saying. It's not what Paul's saying at all. The point is that the way the home is designed, and it has to do with creation. Paul appeals back to creation. Adam is created first and then Eve. The husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. There has to be harmony between these two things, otherwise it becomes confusing for people. So it is always, it does not mean that women, and we talked about this whenever that was, when we did, what is that, Ephesians. It doesn't mean that women submit to men, right? We're very careful to say that. It means that wives submit to their husbands. So if you are a woman, you are not obligated to submit to any man any more than you are any other person in the church, as that we are to submit to one another. But specifically women who are married, you are to not submit to those other people, but to your own husband, because you now belong in the same household as him, and he is the head of the house in that respect. And then husbands, Paul turns around and says, here's how you're to lead your wife as her head. You're to die for her, if necessary. You're to live sacrificially for her, to protect her, to nurture her, to love her, to build her up. Never to domineer her or abuse her or shut her down. So we love to like just kind of rip little parts of the Bible out and just really major on those things and kind of forget the other parts. And so much damage has been done in the church based on that understanding that women listen to men, men are in control, men are the boss, and it's like it's not, you can't get that from a holistic reading of the New Testament, and especially from the Old Testament. Does that make a little more sense? It's not a worth thing at all, though. Not even a little bit. Women are incredible, and for the empowerment thing, I think that it's exciting. As a father of daughters, it's exciting. You know, I want to teach my daughters that they have value as image bearers of God. They have unique gifts that they are going to be able to use in Christ, and that one day, hopefully, and this is the thing that we always say to our non-believing friends as well, that have kind of a problem with the male leading the female thing, is like, you can disagree all you want with how we feel about the Scripture, but I want to lead my wife in such a way that when other people, specifically women, look at our relationship, they think, that's what I want. I want someone who would do anything for me, who would be first for me, who would prioritize me, who would value me, who would protect and build up and all of those things. That's the goal. That's the desire. And people can say what they want about the Bible, but when they see it lived out, and I've told the story before about the class with the girl, where she was like, I wish my boyfriend would do that. I wouldn't take her number for a class project. Yeah. And so it sounds very like limiting and like, oh, how old, but when it's lived out, it's actually quite attractive. And I don't mean like I mean like people are compelled towards it. It's like, man, why wouldn't I want that? Make sense? Yeah. Good, okay. All right, any other questions? Has this been helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Good, okay, yeah, because this is a question that comes up a lot, and I know it's something we talk about, I mean, somewhat regularly, and I want you to understand how this stuff works. If you ever have questions about this, if you ever want a dialogue, and for what it's worth, if you've been wondering and haven't asked, like, what's the percentage that we decide to go ahead and move on? Because if most of our votes that we have are unanimous. When we changed the name to City on a Hill, the final vote was unanimous. There were a few people who did not want to change the name, and we had conversations with them, and they were like, oh yeah, that's cool. There were Celebration Fellowship. With Kelsey, there were 3 others who were against the vote, and there it is again. And we talked with them and explained to them a little bit more. They were on board. The land, I think, there were 2 people who did not affirm.
You're talking about the whole church body?
Talking about total members.
Members, right?
Yes.
Only 2 people.
And as a member, you know, to kind of tail off of your question, you know, you have the right as a member to affirm these things for your voice to be heard. If you choose not to affirm those things, then we assume that means you're on board with it because you haven't said anything one way or the other. Now, if you're out of town or something, we're not going to spring it on you. We have to give you 2 weeks' notice before we take an affirmation. That's why that's that way.
Yeah, you allowed us to post
Yes.
or send you messages.
Yep. So, yes, good. I feel like there was something else. The percentage. We feel like if it's around 97 to 98%, then that is okay.
That's how many have voted, or
That's the total affirmation. Yeah. Now, if it's 98% of like 10 votes, then you know we would go back to the drawing board on that. Yeah. But when we hit a hundreds of votes at that point, and they are overwhelmingly 98, 99% yes, we assume there's not like a pocket out there of 40 people who disagreed with it and just didn't vote.
And you can't think that way.
Yeah, I mean,
If you don't vote, don't write.
Yeah,
You know,
well, exactly. I mean, that's one way of saying it. We say it in elections, we'll say it here, right?
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't have a voice.
But that is why our bylaws require the 2-week notice before that, so that we can't just like on New Year's Sunday pop up a big vote where there's like 50% of the attendance. It has to be advertised for at least 2 weeks before we ask for an affirmation. So, and once again, you can trust, please trust me when I say this. We want everyone to vote, to affirm, whatever you want to call it. We want to hear from you. We don't want to, we don't want like 30 votes that come in favor of what it is that we're asking for. We would be crazy to do that because once again, the idea here is mutual trust between the body and the elders leading it. And if we feel like we've made a decision that you have massive problems with, it does not do us any favors at all to move forward with something that is only going to create more problems. It just doesn't. Oh, we don't want that kind of, we have enough drama to deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
I've seen splits happen because of that.
Oh, absolutely, all the time. So we are very careful to make sure that it's been communicated well, that it has been given ample time to be heard, and that as many people who want to voice, especially a negative affirmation, that they're given the opportunity to do so that we can hear and see kind of a pulse of where everyone is.
Eric, can you, I think it would be good now that you talk about the elders to explain the difference between the traditional Southern Baptist organization structure as opposed to what you've described.
Yeah, well, and like I said, we touched on it for a minute there, but the traditional structure is congregationally led. So you have a pastor who is, well, you have really kind of 2 structures. You have a pastor who is at the mercy of virtually every committee in the church. So anytime you do anything, you have to have a committee. We're going to buy land, got to have a land committee. And the whole committee has to vote, and they have to agree on the land, And that takes, I mean, you know, a long time. Once you finally buy the land, which takes years, literally, we gotta outfit it. We gotta have furniture. So we need a furniture committee. Right? Somebody's got to pick out the furniture, and it can't be one person. So we got to have a committee to do that.
And these committees are formed dynamically, or are they kind of like elders, where there's a group of people that are considered a committee? And
Yeah, no, it's
They have
normally
standing committees and ad hoc committees.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And then you have other churches, and this is more of the mega church model, where you have not an elder-led board, you have a pastor-led church with a board of directors. This is the CEO model, right? Pastor as CEO, where the pastor is the visionary, he's the primary driving force. There are a board of directors who give him, you know, information, opinions, research, statistics. We think you should do this. Maybe it's not a good idea to do that. But at the end of the day, the pastor can make the decision to do whatever he dang well pleases. And the issue with that is that it sets up, I mean, you can think of all the problems. One is it's obviously not biblical. Two, there are many examples, and they are mostly megachurches, where men who are sometimes former CEOs start churches as a business model, and they're very good at doing what they do. And so they have a lot of quote-unquote success, maybe not spiritual depth, certainly not taking great leadership from the Holy Spirit, but they get a lot of money in because they know how to fundraise, and they know how to speak enthusiastically, and they know how to put together teams, and they know how to hold people accountable. And people become a means to an end, right? If you're not getting the job done, you're replaceable. I'll get somebody else who will. You know, if you're a youth pastor and you haven't baptized X number of kids, you're out and the next guy's in because I can get more out of this guy for less money. It's a very cutthroat type of environment. And you can build a lot of people. I dare call it a church, but you can build a lot of people into a single room. And the problem with that is that two things happen. One, the people begin to idolize the individual, not Jesus, which is very problematic. But two, the individual begins to think and believe, I'm really something. I did this. And they kind of develop this sort of untouchable mentality. And it's what gets a lot of them in trouble, right? I mean, you see it all the time. Guys who are busted with prostitutes, drugs, you name it. You know, they're doing it because they're not accountable to anyone. And beyond that, it's like all the big cover-ups that have happened. I think of Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll, back from several years ago now. There was like major shunning going on and spiritual abuse that was happening, and people were just being silenced because no one wanted to challenge Driscoll. He was the top dog, and of course, when the fallout of that finally happened, they had 13 campuses across Orange County, all the way up to Oregon, to Portland. That whole coastline was dominated by them. And when he left Mars Hill, 8 of those churches closed their doors. Because without Mark Driscoll, like, who are we? We're nothing. And it's just sad. And the other ones were just sort of absorbed into other megachurches. None of them, Mars Hill is not a thing today. It was built around a man. And when that man left, it's the same fear I have, honestly. And I love the guy. I love the teaching. I think he's an anointed teacher. But it's the same thing with the Village Church, with Matt Chandler. You know, I wonder if Matt...
Where's that church at?
They're primarily in Flower Mound, but they have campuses. But see, Matt has done a really remarkable thing. He has developed a plan. They had at one time 5 campuses, I think, and I think by 2022 or something like that, I don't know what the end date is, their goal is for all of those churches to become autonomous bodies. That is very admirable. It's very respectable because I think he saw what happened with Mark Driscoll and realized if he has a brain tumor, you know, that was like he had to go through chemotherapy and all kinds of stuff. It was a cancerous brain tumor, And I think he recognized that if like I die, if I go down, or if he's hit, by a car, who's going to keep going to the village church? Why are a lot of these people going? Is it because they have great fellowship and accountability and they buy into the vision of the church? Or is it because Matt's a great teacher? Matt is a great teacher, but that's not why you go to a church. That's not why you go to a church. One of the things that one of my commitments as just my future pastoral dream, if you will, is to have 2 or 3 individuals that can rotate and teach once a month, where I have at least 1 week a month where I'm not up there, because I never want to develop a cult of personality, and it happens in every church where there's only one preacher. It's what James battled for years, and he hated it. He hated it. I remember when I first came here and he wasn't here, people would literally not show up. They would text the people, James isn't here today, don't come. Yeah. Seriously. And do you know what kind of pressure that puts on him? Because then he feels like, I can never take a Sunday off. Because half the stinking people won't come. And so it's a hard balance, man. I mean, we want to use our gifts to edify and to build up, but we never want it to be about us, ever. So it's
I've never seen a situation where the associate pastor was just as in tune with the senior pastor, where you can step in or preach. I've never seen it.
Well, it is a credit to James in his resolve to see the need for transition. We're a unique church. If James didn't do this and he just decided to retire and we just called some new preacher, that guy wouldn't last 6 months. Doesn't matter how good he is, because this is such a unique setup here. He would either not last or half the people would leave. And so that was the dream, is that by the time he gets to the place where he decides, I don't really want to do this at least full time anymore, that we won't miss a beat. And it's fun.
Did you stuff like with Refuge?
Exactly. Well, in his film that he's doing. And so it's incredible. It's an incredible opportunity for the church. It's incredibly wise for him. It's funny because Ann, for those of us who've been around a long time, we remember what it was like before we tag teamed. But for a lot of the new people that come to our church, they're like, this is just who City on a Hill is. You have 2 teachers. And that's just so strange to me, because that's not how I spent the first several years of my life here. But it is.
Alan never.
He did some.
Yeah, he did some preaching.
But it wasn't his strength, and he recognized that. Alan was the best classroom teacher in the world. He did not like to preach much. He would do it if he was asked, but yeah, it was a weird thing.
So during that time, James never took a Sunday off?
No, he would take Sundays off. We'd have missionaries come in. At one time, we had Ryan and Davis that would step in, and sometimes, honestly, there were great messages, but it wasn't James.
Right.
And if you're here for the wrong reason, or you've put so much into that, then it's like, well, what are you going to do when he's not here anymore? You going to stop going to church? Hope not.
Lots of churches have different people that preach.
They do. Well, because they're combating this exact thing. Yeah. There's one church I know of in New York that I'm friends with some of the people there, that he takes the entire summer off. And he has other pastors, local pastors, and missionaries come in every week and preach. And because his whole thing, because he's a very dynamic preacher, he's a very well-known preacher, and he doesn't want to build this sort of cult of personality in the church. So he goes off and preaches in other places. He's not just on vacation, but he doesn't preach there. And then he comes
You
back.
have to be fed too. Yeah.
You're right.
So has James talked about how many more years he thinks he's gonna do this?
Nope.
No.
My guess for James and the way he and I work together is that I don't foresee there being a time when James is just done. And I could be wrong about that, but I think probably more than likely what will happen is you will start seeing him tag team or preach single-handedly less. and you'll probably see more of me in a solo capacity while he is doing, because I mean, the way this film thing is happening right now, he's talking to some pretty big names right now. It's a film series for women who are survivors of sexual abuse. And
He's doing it?
yeah, Michael is filming it, and they have some really, really great people. They went up to Colorado Springs a few weeks ago, Doug Weiss's facility, and he's in talks with Lifeway right now, and I will let him talk, because I don't know if it's going to happen yet, but there's at least one person that he's talking to that I think if this person gets a hold of this material or is involved in it, it will absolutely be a mainline thing. Yeah, it's like a 5-disc series that churches can do for women. But all that to say that it allows him to do those kinds of things. So, yeah, go to his Facebook page. You can read
That
it.
just opened up doors for him to be able to travel and introduce that.
Yep.
That's
So,
right.
these are all decisions that have been made with the approval of our elders. So that's the thing that you need to know. I plan on getting through way more than this, but I think this is good because this is...
Basically, James is Paul and you're Timothy.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. He is very much a father figure in my life, you know, and that's been no secret to people. My dad's in prison. I don't speak to my father, and is not a believer, and so James, from a very early age in my spiritual walk, took me in, and everything I know about preaching, you know, I learned first from him.